activism that was needed to save the Palo Alto Art Center activities and allow exhibitions and programs like this to continue. So it's really great to have come through that and be able to do the kind of things that we really like to do. So thank you for that. I also want to mention that the Black Index has an exhibition catalog that is at the printer as we speak. And there's going to be a book launch for the celebration of that publication next Friday at noon on June 18th. And Karen has put information in the chat about that. For people who have seen the exhibition or explored the website, one of the aspects of the Black Index is the use of the font called redaction that we use in the catalog, and we also use it in all of the labels for the objects and the title wall. And that font was designed by two men, Jeremy Mickle and Forrest Young, as part of a commission for artwork that's in the exhibition by Reginald Dwayne Betts and Titus Kafar. And they are going to be part of this. They're going to be talking about their design and the way that the font has been used for different projects as part of this program next Friday. And then the other catalog authors are going to be a part of the program too. So anyway, it's going to be really great. I'm looking forward to it. I think everyone will learn a lot. And so I just want to invite you to that. So I really love the title of this 3-part class, People, Places, and Things, because it's kind of wide open. There's so many ways that I can speak to these different themes. Today we're focusing on people. And so we'll start with a peek into the world of African-American artists and Black representation in art. And I wanted to start actually with an artist who's not Black. I wanted to start with Justice Engelhardt Kuhn. This painting called Henry Darnall III as a Child. And this is the first oil painting or easel painting of an African-American person. So it's historic, it's important. It's owned by the Maryland Historical Society. And it really set a precedent for the way in which African-American people are represented in American art. And I often start my modern African-American artist class with this painting because it helps to illustrate some of the dynamics, power dynamics, issues of visibility and invisibility when it comes to African-American people that we still struggle with today in American art. And so a few things I want us to notice, and then I actually am going to ask to hear from you. So people who want to speak, I'm going to ask you to speak up. So the title is one thing that I'd like us to start off with, Henry Darnall III as a Child. There are two people in this painting, and yet the title tells us that there's only one, right? It helps us to focus on and understand who is important in this painting, who is visible, who is central, and who is insignificant. And so, just by the title of the work, we get a sense of what we're entering into in terms of understanding social context, but also the clues that the artist is giving us in terms of racial dynamics, issues of enslavement, equity, power. Henry Darnall III was clearly a young man when this painting was made, commissioned by his parents. He was part of the Maryland gentry, so land-owning class in Maryland. And this was an opportunity for the family to celebrate their young child, a boy who is becoming a man, and capturing this moment in art. So I'd like us to, and Kuhn, I think that Kuhn did name the painting himself. I mean, it's pretty just descriptive. There's not anything creative about it. He was commissioned just to make the portrait of the boy. And so you just get his name and making sure that we understand that he's a child in this painting. So I'd like to ask if people would like to speak. What do we know about Henry Darnall III by looking at this painting? And this is a wide open question, but thinking about the visual evidence, what is in front of us? What are we supposed to know about this boy? And I think you can raise your hand, or if you just want to unmute, if you're able to do that and speak, that's fine.
He appears quite wealthy. We presume that, or I presume that that's his home and his land and his property. And he's finely dressed and he appears quite confident. He's looking directly at the viewer.
Great, thank you. Perfect, awesome. You know, look at where he is, right? Assuming that this is his home. This is a very grand place, just looking at the architecture, the balustrade. Look at the fabric that's part of that, I'll say curtain. We know it seems much too grand for that term. And then he's kind of moving off to the side so we can see the land, right? So we can get that association between him and the land that he and his family owns. Okay. Other things people want to say about?
Got a bow and arrow.
Yes, a bow and arrow. So what do you think we're supposed to know about him by seeing him with this bow and arrow?
He must live where he can hunt.
Okay, great. That he can
has
hunt.
learned how to hunt.
Okay, he's learned how to hunt. He's learning how to hunt. I would also say this is probably not what he wears when he goes hunting.
Right.
So we're getting a sense of him being well-rounded, you know, that it looks like he's wearing some fine silk garment with the silver buckles and, you know, this fancy lace collar that's on his chest. So we're seeing that he's a young huntsman. He's powerful in that way. He's athletic. He's skilled, but he's also a gentleman at the same time. Kate, you want to go ahead?
Yes. I would assume from looking at it that the hunting for him is recreational rather than
Yeah.
as in hunting and fishing and today.
Very good point. He's not hunting because he's hungry.
Yeah.
It's not a life or death issue. I think that's a very good point to make. It's for sport, right? And maybe just a family tradition. It's something that he's sort of allowed to do, to be athletic. But it's not something that he needs to feed the family.
There may be sort of a social aspect to it.
Yes, and a social aspect, right? So hunting with a crew of people, right? You think about the hunt and traditions of the hunt in Britain, for instance, and that he's part of that legacy.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's a social activity.
Awesome. I love that. That's really helpful. Now, I'm leading you to the left side of the painting. What is he hunting?
Fowl.
Fowl.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks, Marcia. Yeah, fowl, a bird. And what we have is evidence that he is good at what he does. So we have this bird off to the side that's being held by this young Black boy. And so looking at this Black boy, I'd like us to think now about, why do you think he's in the painting, right? The painting is called Henry Darnall III as a Child. Why does he need to be there? What's his function?
I think it must represent class.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay, so absolutely representing class. It tells us more about the wealth and status of Henry Darnall III. You know, instead of having a retriever, he has a young enslaved boy who may be older than him. You know, it's hard to tell what the ages are. I think sometimes when I look at this painting, I think the Black boy might be even taller than Henry Darnall III. But he seems to be kind of coming in at an angle. Maybe that makes him a little bit shorter. And that helps to centralize the central figure here. When we look at this unnamed Black boy, the Black boy tells us to look at Henry Darnall III. And the reason why I'm saying that is because of, mainly because of his eyes, right? We look at him and he says, no, look over here. This is where the action is. This is what's important. And then that angle of his back sort of just, slightly curving inward, but inward towards Henry Darnall III. Other things people want to add, thinking about the relationship between these two boys, there's a few other key things that they probably seem so obvious to you that you haven't thought to mention them, but
Well, the Black boy's looking up at him because he's the guy's master's child, presumably.
Yeah, absolutely. So, right, he's looking at him, he's telling us to look at him, and he's signifying their relationship, that he is, he defers to him.
He's lower, even if sitting down and standing up, he'd be taller.
Right, exactly. That's what I think. I think he might even be older, but you see him kind of slouching, or, we can't see the rest of his body to know for sure. But he is in deference to the central figure. Other things people might notice about, tell me where he is.
Oh, one is inside and one is outside.
Right.
Whatever that is. And it certainly looks like the Black young man maybe went and got the bird.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
After it was shot.
Well, I mean, even with the curtains, it looks like because of the balustrade, it looks like he's on a porch, and then the Black kid who retrieved the bird is down a step from him, in the terraced garden or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we have to think about this, right? It's like, what exactly is going on? Now, certainly, Kuhn could have just decided to make up a scene, right? This isn't necessarily a documentary image, but there's a lot of symbolism in what he's put together to offer us. So in one way, we could imagine maybe he was hunting, Henry Darnall III was hunting from his home and was shooting, across the balustrade, and the enslaved boy goes and retrieves it, right? Which you would have a dog, a retriever, to do that usually, but Darnall's family is so wealthy that they have people. So, and very clearly someone said, I think Marcia, we're looking at inside and outside, right? Just saying those words, yes, we are thinking about location, but I'd like us to also think more symbolically about wealth and class, right? The kind of lives that these two boys lived. I also want us to think about—
What about that thing he's around the collar on the Black boy? Is that, I can't quite tell. Is that supposed to be a cloth collar or not?
It is very likely a silver collar. The Maryland Historical Society has some in their collection. So it is a sign of enslavement. It's a fine piece of metal, and what that tells us, again, is to think about the class of the Darnall family, right? That even their slaves have fine silver collars.
One thing I was wondering is, even though it looks like it's an inside-outside thing, I have been to houses, not necessarily in Maryland, but in Virginia and places like that, where that scene in the background could be painted wallpaper.
Yeah, that's true. I have seen those too. The White House has some wallpaper like that in different rooms.
Yeah.
I think it's not clear, especially when we're looking at the bottom, like the missing bottom half of the Black boy. It's like, okay, we can't necessarily take this for a real scene.
Yeah.
But there's pieces that he's bringing in as the artist to help us understand the identities of these two people. And even if it is wallpaper, it still serves that function to show us the land.
Yeah.
You know. One more thing before we move on is I want us to look at the sky. And I want us to also look at I'll say the built environment. We're talking about the land, right? We've got this kind of fountain, this perspective into the town, and we've got these buildings. That's all on the side on which Henry Darnall is turned, like he sort of turned that direction. The way his hand is close to the balustrade there on that bow, right? It's kind of a presentation, but to his back, right? This is where the clouds get dark. This is where the cypress trees are dark, right? And we have this kind of splitting of the clouds and the sky. You know, my students call this the God moment. It's like, where the clouds part behind his head. You know, he's this golden boy. And on the side of the trees, the natural world in the darkness, that's where we have the black boy. So none of that is coincidental. Everything is planned. And it is fair for us to really analyze all of these elements. And they do have an impact on the way we perceive the people in the picture. So it's a very kind of educational picture. At the same time that maybe if we were in a museum, we might just walk right past it. But to really stop and think about, gosh, in 1710, you know, and this is the first painted portrait of a Black person. This really says a lot, right? It has an important historical place. So I wanted to start there. And even though we're not going to be able to go chronologically from 1710 to 2021, and I'm picking just a few highlights, I wanted to make sure that we started here. It's a painting I never get tired of looking at. So let's move on. Here we go. Are you seeing a different picture? Sometimes there's a lag or.
Yep. It's
Yeah.
right.
You. Okay, good. So I'm showing you a photograph of Edmonia Lewis. And Edmonia Lewis, when we think about people in African-American art history, and I think about people and maybe I think about who would be some good characters for me to discuss with you, she was the first person that came to mind. So Edmonia Lewis was a neoclassical sculptor who worked in the United States and Italy, in Rome in particular, in the 19th century. And she was a very unconventional woman. For one thing, she worked in marble, which is a very hard substance. So she was a very strong woman. She was educated. She went to Oberlin College, which was the only college at the time in the United States where Black people and Native American people could be educated. And she was the child of a Native American woman and an African American man. Her older brother made his fortune, I think it was very short-lived though, in the gold rush, and with his money sent his younger sister to school. And she was very committed, like many African Americans who were free in the 1850s, 1860s, very committed to the abolitionist movement. And she was really patronized by white abolitionists who paid her to, on commission, to do a number of different kinds of works. But mostly she made these small, kind of oversized coins called abolitionist emblems that would have portraits in profile of white abolitionist figures and some kind of logo, or that's not the right word, like a slogan, like, am I not a man or a brother? Am I not a woman and a sister? Some kind of slogan that would force a kind of moral imperative for someone who got this coin to really be faced with the question of whether Black people are human or not, and whether slavery should end or not. So those are some of the things about Edmonia Lewis I think that are really interesting. I want you to just kind of keep that in mind as we look at her most famous sculpture. This is owned by the Howard University Art Gallery in Washington, D.C., and this is called Forever Free. And it is just smaller than life size, carved in marble, and from 1867, so right after the formal end of enslavement in the United States. Again, she worked in a neoclassical style, and that's one of the reasons why she was working in marble. But we also see that influence in the drapery of the clothing of the man who's standing, and then the woman or girl who's down, crouched down at the bottom of the sculpture. So we have many questions about this this sculpture, and since people are willing to speak, I will ask you, what do you think we're looking at here? What is going on? And there's a lot going on. So just say one or two things, and we'll keep going around. What do you think the subject matter is?
I see broken chains.
Great. Okay, so we see broken chains. So up here in his hand is a broken chain. Down here, he has his foot on this ball with the chain. Okay, and then we have a chain here as well. I think I have some details to show you. Here's another look. And I might go back and forth with some of these details as we're speaking. So right, here's the other metal that would go, right, the shackle that would go around his other wrist. That's freed, and so he has his hand here on her shoulder. Okay.
They don't look
And
African.
she's not a Black person, is she?
Okay, so this is one of the great, yeah, you guys know exactly where we're going. These people do not look Black. Now there's reasons for this that we have speculated on. One is that if she made the people look sort of immediately legible as Black, she would not get support. She was reliant on mostly white abolitionists. And there was the idea in the 19th century, as it has continued throughout the years, that the sculpture cannot be beautiful inherently. It can't be beautiful if there are Black people in the artwork. So she had to navigate these limitations of what was considered acceptable in terms of figuration, right? The representation of Black people. In order to make that palatable, she had to make them not look Black. Okay, so that's one of the things that she had to negotiate as a Black woman and a Native American woman artist in the 19th century. So there has been some discussion that the curliness of his hair was a gesture at us being able to see that this is a Black person. But we don't get that in the representation of the woman. Okay, so she has been criticized then and since then for making Black people that look white.
I don't see chains on the female figure. Could she represent instead freedom?
Yeah, let's look at, there's this bit of chain that's, and I'm sorry this is blurry, but there's this bit of chain that's by her foot. And one of the questions has been, you're right, there aren't any chains on her wrists. I'll go back. There aren't any chains on her wrists, right? Here, she's completely free. But there has been a great deal of writing and conversation around whether or not this chain at the bottom is actually broken, or if she is still tied somehow to the kind of mantle of this sculpture, and that she is not free. Because we still see this metal going around her ankle. So this is a point of contention.
By representing the figures as appearing Caucasian, doesn't that kind of put the viewer, you know, I'm again assuming I'm a white person, doesn't that put a white viewer in the shoes of the person represented? And wouldn't that be kind of more scandalous than showing the slave person as with Black characteristics?
Yeah, so this is interesting because we have to think about the different strategies that artists are using at this time. Who are abolitionists. They want white audiences. They want whites to be empathetic to the plight of Black people who are enslaved. How can they do that through art? Maybe by showing the figures as white, the white viewers might feel like they could imagine what it was like to be enslaved. Maybe they would identify with the figures if the figures were white. And in that identification, maybe there could be empathy and maybe political action. There's a lot of steps that would go into making that all possible. But this is one of the strategies that Edmonia Lewis was using. If she could make an identifiable white couple here that maybe whites would understand the plight. If she made them look Black, then white viewers wouldn't want to look at them and they wouldn't feel any empathy.
I look at him and it looks like because the man's hair is a larger curls, not African curls, that she's trying to make it look like a classical Roman statue. Because I mean, I've seen Roman statues where the men have loosely curly hair.
Yeah, I agree.
In a classical pose too, kind of.
Yes, all of that is deliberate, and you're right on. I mean, that's the style that she was working in. I think she was also in part trying to use neoclassicism, not only because it was the style that was accepted at the day, but there was something really challenging about representing Black people in this highly respected, art form from the roots of civilization. There's something subversive about that. And in that way, she might challenge viewers to understand the humanity of Black people if she made them appear in this neoclassical style. So I want us to think about this being really a dilemma. How helpful my students, right? They were born after the year 2000. They say, well, what good was she doing? If she's trying to help with emancipation, but the people that she's sculpting are white. And so we try to think about her choices, her strategies, how she's speaking to her personal politics, but also dependent financially on white viewers, and the kind of negotiations that she chose to make. Another aspect of this sculpture that has been controversial is about the representation of the woman. So is she a woman? If she stands up, is she going to be as tall as this man, right? I don't think so. But she's also so kind of reduced in terms of her scale, that she just looks smaller, so much smaller that maybe she's a young girl. That has been part of the speculation. And another question there is, what is she being freed into? What is her vision of freedom? What opportunities will she have in comparison to freedom for him? Right? So people have written about these two aspects of the sculpture. One being, as I mentioned, is she still chained to the bottom? Okay, can she move? And then this has been the other point of contention, which is there weight on this hand? Is she being freed to fulfill sort of normative gender roles for women? Or is she's being freed she's free now to go from the possession of white men to the possession of Black men. And is that freedom? what is the fullness of freedom? What kind of mobility will she have? What kind of options? Is she being kept down by this man in this shift away from enslavement? So now this has not been decided. This is the discourse. These are the questions that people ask, and I would love to hear what you think about. What do you think the relationship is between these two people? What do you think Edmonia Lewis might be telling us? Let me see if I have some other slides.
This is Kent, actually.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Well, I don't think his arm is not stressed out as if he's holding her down.
Okay.
I agree, though, that she's about half as his size. Look, her knee comes up there. So she's going to be quite a bit smaller. He looks like, well, he looks like an athlete. Like he's represented maybe as a boxer or something. His left arm is well out of proportion to the rest of his body. His hand is huge. Those are the things I see.
This is Marcia. My first reaction was she was like an angel representing his religious Christian belief that he could be free.
Okay, but yeah, now both of you are saying really helpful things. And I was thinking, and Kent was talking about the proportion of the hand. Look at, I'm pointing, you can't see what I'm doing. Here, I'll look at the cursor. The size of his hand and the size of her head.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God, yeah.
You know, so there are some things going on with proportion that I think could help us ask questions about power and age. There hasn't been in the scholarship any suggestion that she's his daughter. I mean, they are looked upon as a couple, like a man and woman couple who would have children and be married and all of that. And yet there's something about how kind of diminutive she is in stature and proportion that makes us question what her role, what her future would be. And part of the question around that is looking at who Edmonia Lewis was. She never married. She was likely a lesbian. She was at least as strong as this man, carving marble. Right? She rejected traditional gender roles. And so perhaps we can think about her status in her profession in life. And it's been suggested we could read that kind of biography into this work. Yeah. I also like the idea of the angel, because she really does look like in that pose, right? On one knee, is she pleading? Is she grateful? Is she thanking God? Right? There's some kind of genuflecting that's going on here. That almost like a figure you might see in a cemetery, you know? And so, right, is she an apparition? Is she really there? Right? Is she, I'm being provocative now. But, you know, is she kind of a more spiritual figure rather than a real figure? I want to show you this. So this is from 1835 by Patrick Reason, who was an engraver. And it's mislabeled or miscaptioned, young colored man of the city of New York. Well, this is a woman, and her breast is hidden by her arm. But this is an abolitionist symbol, the kind of which that I mentioned you would find on an abolitionist emblem like this. And this is the kind of text that would go along with this image. Am I not a woman and a sister? And so we think about this as the kind of work that certainly Edmonia Lewis was familiar with, had seen, had circulated, had created, and comparing the pose of this figure, right, with the figure here. That there's another point of comparison. Am I not a woman and a sister, right? Begging to be considered on par or to have social, gender, equity with white women, right? Pleading for sisterhood. Will she then go into the gender norms of white women and be beholden to her husband, or will she be able to be a kind of maverick radical like Edmonia Lewis? So just things to think about. I'm happy if anyone wants to speak to all of this. It's a lot. It's kind of a messy, interesting sculpture. But any thoughts people want to share? Okay, I think those are my slides for Edmonia Lewis, so we'll move on. And it is 5:40. So I think we're going to talk about one more artist, and then we'll wrap it up. But again, if anyone has any parting thoughts, now's your time. Okay. So we're going to move on to another artist who is a contemporary of Edmonia Lewis, a man who's known largely as Dave the Potter, but we do know his last name now, like in the last 10 years, he's now written about as Dave Drake. And Dave Drake, you can see his work on Antiques Roadshow. It comes up and people have this different objects from him. He made many of these pots. He was a ceramicist, he was a potter. And thinking about characters in African-American art history, he was the second person who came to mind. We don't have any images of him, but we have images of his work. And you know, he's really interesting because he is the first Black Black sculptor. Let's see, what's the right way to say this? I can just be clear that the first Black ceramicist, right, who signed his work. He's the first person who's not anonymous as just an enslaved person making wares for his owner, right? So what we see with Dave Drake is very unique. We get his name. We know he could write. He worked for and was owned by someone named Lewis Miles, who owned a printing press. And he also put the dates on the pots when he made them. So there's no one like Dave Drake. I mean, he is a singular character. There's children's books about him. His work is highly coveted. And he also, just to give you some more details, he was working in South Carolina. Okay, so he's working in the South. And again, the LM, that's the name of his owner. So people knew that he was, you know, controlled by somebody. I'm going to show you some examples of his work. Stoneware jar from 1857. The other side of this jar says, "Pretty little girl on the verge, volcanic mountain, how they burge." So he had, he was a poet, right? These are rhymes that he would put in, and they didn't all rhyme, and not all of them have stanzas. But it's very unusual for an enslaved person to have that kind of freedom, not only to have the ability to write, the permission to write his own name on his work, but then to also have this creative expression in the form of writing. We don't know much about him. Everything we know is through his pottery. And the name of the newspaper that Lewis Miles owned was called The Hive, and he did train Dave to be a typesetter. So he was part of this group of, you know, a small percentage of enslaved people who were living at the same time that the free population of Blacks was increasing. And many of these Black people, enslaved and free, worked as apprentices for their owners or for white men who paid them, as free people who were paid for their work. This is called Great and Noble Jar. You can see Lewis Miles's initials, the date, and then Dave Batter. This was another man that owned him. Oops, let me go back. Here we go. I'm just going to read some other rhymes that were used on many of his pots. This one on the other side says, hold sheep, goat, or bear. And that's all of the text for this. So it's more like instructions. Some of his other pots say, a very large jar which has 4 handles, pack it full of fresh meat, then light candles. Put every bit between, surely this jar will hold 14. The 4th of July is surely come to sound the fife and beat the drum. This jar is made all of cross. If you don't repent, you will be lost. Just another sort of beautiful photograph of this work. So this will be the last person that we'll talk about. There's a contemporary artist named Theaster Gates, who really is quite remarkable barrier-breaking artist. He's a professor at the University of Chicago. He's trained as a potter. He trained in Japan. He's also a singer, a very good singer. He's a performer. He also has a social practice, meaning for him, he buys houses, he fixes them up, and then he turns them into community spaces in sort of financially failing neighborhoods all over the country. And he's someone who, when he went to Japan to study ceramics, he then came back, and his friends were saying, what are you doing? You're this Black man, and you're making these, you're firing these pots, you're wearing these Japanese clothes. Like, who are you? What's your identity? And he just loves clay and didn't feel like he was doing the wrong thing, right, by being a Black man and working in clay. And he started to do research, and he found Dave the Potter. And he decided to have a 2-person show, Theaster Gates and Dave the Potter, called To Speculate Darkly. And I want to, there's a number of things I want to have us think about here. One is the audacity and the creativity to have a solo or a 2-person show with someone you've never met who lived centuries before you. And to think of it also as a kind of recovery project. I think for Theaster, he wants to make a connection with Dave, but also to bring him into the museum world as a fine artist, someone to be respected and revered as an artist in a way that Dave the Potter wasn't able to be revered in his own time. So I'm showing you, I have a couple of installation shots, and this exhibition is well documented online, so I invite you to look online. In this case, this is a pot by Dave Drake. And then the other work in the show is all by Theaster Gates. So this is Theaster Gates, and then Theaster puts his own language on his pots as kind of an homage and a way of showing a lineage and respect to Dave. Trained in Japan, we see these calligraphic paintings in the background of pots. Those are also by Theaster. And I'm just going to play, this is a lovely, it's just about 3 minutes where he's going, this is Theaster, he's going to talk about his project. Let's see. If the sound isn't good, tell me, and I'll see if I can adjust some settings.
As I make this pot and I'm using water and I'm using this clay body, I can't help but think that I have this deep kind of kindred relationship with Dave and the materials that he used. My name's Theaster Gates. I'm a performance and installation artist. My commission on Dave the Potter had to do with the museum's interest in creating an opportunity to talk about one of the most important craft figures in American history to me, Dave Drake or Dave Landrum. He was a potter who made work between the 1830s and 1870s, with the most important body of work being in the 1850s.
Historians have written about Dave quite a bit over the years, but Theaster is going to give Dave a new interpretive angle. Rather than just writing about the objects, writing about what we know about Dave's history, Theaster is going to emote, to be Dave, to try and understand not just the maker, but the personality. What's unique about Dave's work is that he wrote poems on the shoulders of the pots that dealt with everything from his daily experiences on the plantation to giving a tribute to people who were purchasing the pieces.
Theaster Gates, Resurrecting Dave, the Slave Potter, is a critical component to our community programming to engage new audiences and frankly, to take our traditional audiences and show them other ways of thinking about art and how art relates to everyday life.
While there's the objects that land in the exhibition space, and that's a very big part of the project for me, there's this other work that I feel like I'm trying to do. That work is a kind of creative social work. So we've been in conversation with the Milwaukee Choirs. Yes, Milwaukee Choirs. Yeah, and it looks like they have the capacity to kind of be in support of the project. Okay. There's a series of choirs that we're reaching out to here in Milwaukee. There's also an opportunity to do a residency at the Color Factory.
To bring those workers back into the community and to let them shine and to show their abilities and talents.
Helping me to fabricate some of the works in the exhibition.
It's also going to engage the city of Milwaukee. The second facet of the project is really outside the walls of the museum. Theaster's music, his performances are going to be bringing in people from the city who don't often get to the museum. So I see this both as a project with a historic component, a scholarly component, and also with a community.
This exhibition is allowing me an opportunity to now have the conceptual works and the performative work and craft all combined to deliver a story of Dave that I think is much more compelling than just seeing his pots in a historical museum. So I feel really fortunate for this opportunity. So many pots, my name is here.
Okay. I'm going to move to the next slide.
As I make this.
Here we go. I actually wanted to give us the opportunity to hear some of the music that Theaster created as part of this project he did in Milwaukee in 2010. So that he worked with local choirs, as you hear, from the previous video. And he composed music with lyrics that allow an opportunity, kind of a speculative opportunity, to hear what Dave may have been thinking, what his life may have been like, what he wanted to share. And this is a really extraordinary collaboration that brings, it's a cliche, but brings history to life. I mean, there's a way in which, to break that down a bit, what Theaster has done is to help us find a useful, illuminating way to kind of go back and rediscover this person that we know very little about. His connection with, Dave is through a shared skill set, and how incredible it is to speculate and think about what we might learn from the past based on the talents that he has now. So again, you can find this, and there's lots of information about Theaster. He's won, every major award. But I wanted to show you just a little bit. Let's see. I'm gonna start around. So what I wanted to just offer you is, a way in which, oh, let me stop it. Yeah, I didn't know the sound was giving us trouble. But I wanted us to just think about how in this project, Theaster's and this whole choir is giving voice, right, to a voice that we know very little about. He turned the museum into a church, essentially, to allow Black voices to be heard. And that's something that's very unusual. And I think it's very powerful just to have that group of people say, my name is Dave, my name goes here. There's a way in which we might feel differently about the Potts, or we might be able to speculate ourselves on, in whatever superficial way we can, what Dave was like, what his situation was like, what his personality was like. So I'll end with that. I really like these contemporary projects that look to the past, and I think that's one of the reasons why I picked this. But we're going to talk about people and African-American artists. We have to talk about Dave, and we have to talk about Theaster. So I'm glad that I had the chance to at least introduce them to you if you didn't know about them already. And yeah, hope that you take a deeper dive into this work. So I'll stop sharing my screen. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask, or maybe we're still all thinking? But I'm happy to hear whatever you want to share.
You opened so many doors tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Marcia. Yeah, it's a lot to think about. But yeah, there's so much to learn from history, and I really think this was an effective project. Any other thoughts before you have your weekend?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kate.
Well, I'm sorry you can't see me, but it's slightly tangential. But the discussion of the boy who was hunting in the third reminded me of a book by a contemporary African-American man who is a hunter and conservationist. He's also a retired professor of biology at Clemson, and grew up in a farm next to a national forest in South Carolina. The book is called The Home Place: Memoirs of a Colored Man's Love Affair with Nature. The man can write. He must be a great biologist, I tell you, but he can write about nature absolutely gorgeously. It was a great read.
Kate, tell me the subtitle again. A Colored Man's?
Memoirs of a Colored Man's Love Affair with Nature. And the author is J, period, Drew Lanham, Lanham. So if any of you are interested in nature writing,
That's great.
I don't necessarily buy his, he grew up hunting for eating purposes, but he does discuss the thrill of it. And, I don't love that point of view, but he also talks about birding while black, apparently was a phrase he was using way before the Central Park incident. Some of his personal evolution and the family history and how he got trained religiously. It's a good book.
Okay. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, this is a perspective that may be new to us, but it's interesting. And then he went on to become a scientist, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that is really interesting. And Karen put the Amazon link in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. See how the team works? So great.
Thank you.
Bridget, I just have a quick kind of reflection in thinking about Theaster Gates's kind of community engagement projects, those houses that he's really turned into community centers. I do think about Mark Bradford. The Palo Alto Arts Center Foundation did a trip to Los Angeles, as you know, that you were part of. We went to Art and Practice, Mark Bradford's, gallery, community center. I also think about what Titus Kaphar is doing in Connecticut as well, in New Haven. So thinking about kind of some of these, contemporary art superstars who are giving back to the communities in which they grew up or the communities in which they find themselves. Just kind of an interesting thing I was thinking about. And I don't know if you have thoughts or reflections on that.
Yeah, I do. It's interesting. It is interesting. There's a lot to say. So one thing, Mark Bradford and Titus Kaphar were both foster children who have become superstars. And I think that has something to do with, not necessarily that this is true for everyone, but it certainly has sensitized them to needs in the community and to reaching out and helping other people once you've gotten so much fame and respect and money. They are two of the leaders in terms of African-American artists and maybe American artists who have decided to build institutions, to use their art to do things that are outside of the art world to help other people. And I think it's really inspiring. So yes, we put Art and Practice and Next Haven. There's links to both of those in the chat if people want to explore that. Yeah, terrific. Yeah, I know at Next Haven, which is the name of Titus Kaphar's project, that's where, he opened it up for a location for people to get vaccinated. It's like, great, just practical things.
It's really about belonging, isn't it?
It is so much about belonging. And, it seems like in my experience working with artists, and even for me being an art historian, a lot of us, and maybe this resonates with other people listening too, you go to the arts because you feel like a misfit, you feel like you don't quite fit in with some of the other things that you're supposed to be doing. No one, I think that I know, was raised to be an artist, you're such a good student. We want you to be an artist. This is our future for you. It doesn't happen like that. You kind of come to it because you have to. You're creative. You maybe think a little bit differently than people around you, and you figure out how to make your way. And I think that at least for Mark and for Titus, there's a sense of wanting to make that way for other people as well, and help them feel like there's a place for them. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I had one about the pots and jars by Dave Potter, and that is that, first of all, he was able to write, or he learned to read and write without being beaten by his owner. but he was not afraid of putting that information up at the top of his pot, not down at the bottom where people usually sign things.
Yeah. You know, I don't know his history with his different owners, and we don't know his life story, but we do know that he was allowed to, you know, someone taught him to read and write, and he was allowed to sign. And that, yeah, there was a sense, I like that you're pointing out where he wrote. You know, you can't miss it. It's front and center. It's right at the top. As Theaster said, he wrote on the shoulders of the pot. It's like, oh, I love it. You know, it's it's very tangible and obvious, and that does give us some evidence of a sense of freedom, right? At the same time, we know that he was enslaved. We don't know anything else about the other aspects of his life, and I think it's safe to say that he was kind of a novelty, that his pots would bring more money to his owners, right? So that, you know, all of that economic power went to someone else. But he did have some sense of a different kind of presence, I think, than most enslaved people who were making pots and curtains and quilts and, you know, all of the other parts of domestic life.
I just want to add that there are 3 pots of Dave the Potter's work at the airport, at the SFO airport.
What?
In the international terminal.
Oh my gosh. Well, I would be so surprised if I saw them there. That's so great.
I thought I should add that.
You should have. And they have a great arts program there. They borrow things from, you know, all over the place. So what a cool thing, and great that you noticed it.
I was told that by the exhibition designer who's in my living room.
You had inside information.
But it just happened. It just happened at the end of your talk. So I wasn't even sure that they were there right now, but I've been aware of his art. I've been aware of his work for years.
Yeah. That is super cool.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder where they're from too. But what a great way to reach a diverse audience by being in an airport, you know?
Exactly.
Very cool.
In the middle between the moving sidewalks.
Yeah, that's terrific. How fun.
Oh, it's what?
Pre-security.
It's pre-security.
Okay.
So we can see
So
it.
field trip, right? You don't need a ticket. You can go and look at it.
The best kind.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Sure.
And hopefully I'll see you at the next one. And they put the date in the chat in August. Oh, no, July 9th. We're doing places. And I'll tell you now, I do want to spend some time thinking about Noah Purifoy. I don't know if anyone's been to Noah Purifoy's, Noah Purifoy's Outdoor Desert Art Museum. So look that up if you're unfamiliar with Noah Purifoy. And then for things, we can talk about so many different things in August. So, oh, good. Kathy's been there already. Awesome. Okay. Have a terrific weekend, you guys.
I'll register for the other 2.
Good. Yes, please do, Helen. I'll see you there.
I did, but I had to ask about why I had to do it, and then I understood that when the peculiarities of Eventbrite, you can only register for one thing at a time.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good for everybody to know.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great presentation. Thanks so much, Bridget.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. You're awesome.